Hey everyone, this is Stephen J. Marr, old friend of mine, author of 3 thrillers. That's hard to say. Author of 3 thrillers. And he went to Harvard and he learned how to do a workshop. Okay. I can say that because we're all buddies. Anyway, he's really good. So pay attention and enjoy yourselves. Carry on, Steve.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you very much. And thank you for the opportunity to do this. Since I attended what I like to refer to as a Cambridge area university, I have been thinking that it would be fun to try to do a workshop in the style that I learned there. So that part is accurate. Monica and I are both journalists and work together at the Chronicle Herald for a fair time. Maybe we won't say how long, but
No, that's
no.
good things away.
So I thought we have until noon. Is that right?
11:45, noon.
So I thought what I would do, as you know, I've sent out a homework exercise that I don't know whether you all received it. Some of you sent me a copy. This was the sort of style of the workshop that I learned about at that Cambridge area university. So I thought what I would do is start by talking a little bit about how I came to write the 3 books and the things I learned while I was working on them, with some principles of general application that I learned along the way from people who know a lot more about this than I do. So I thought I'd talk about that for a little while, and then we would get to the part of the exercise where everyone reads the exercise if they like, and we can discuss it. Before, I thought that perhaps to begin, though, we can go around and everyone can say their name and where they live, if you want, and what kind of writing you're working on. Does that sound all right? Shall we start with you?
Sure. I'm Tekla. I write prose and poetry, and I'm currently working on, I've been working on that for years. It's a long-term project on a mystery thriller crime story thing that is firmly set in Pictou County in a small town environment. And I don't know, recently my friend Sarah challenged me to write romance, which is way more relaxing. And mostly because I don't take it seriously, really, but it's fun, and it's kind of nice to do some fun writing in between. So, yeah. But yeah, I have nothing published because I never quite finished my editing process.
Right, yeah.
Does
Well, thank
anybody
you.
ever?
What's
Does
that?
anybody ever finish the editing?
I don't know.
No, I don't think so. I'm Sarah, her friend. I write anything and everything. My most recent objective was to write a romance, which is very unusual for me, and it just got published last week, which is yay.
Oh, congratulations!
So then I started another one, but then I have a son at home, and we had online learning, and that kind of put in the way. So going through those obstacles of finding the time and the energy to write. So I like to write everything. That's me.
Thank
And
you.
this is my friend Ray.
I'm Ray. I'm Sarah's friend. And I'm kind of like her too. I write a little bit of everything and kind of focusing on children's picture books right now, but you name it. Freelance journalism, the internet, copywriting, whatever. So not one particular genre, just whatever happens to tickle my fancy at the time.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Monica, do you want to?
Sure, I write historic nonfiction and journalism. I retired from journalism. I retired chasing endings. So, and I am working on the whole short stories and a novel. 2 children's books. They're all like, you should see my office. Anyway, that's me.
Thank you.
I'm Andrew, I write the President's Report for the Heritage Trust every 3 months.
Andrew's here to provide security.
I kind of know Ray. I attended a playwriting workshop at St. X once, a long time ago. Were you not there?
I don't think so.
No, it wasn't you? Oh, okay, so I recognize you from Pixel Publisher.
Yeah,
Yeah, great job, by the way. I was all over the map.
you kind of sneaked in at the last minute.
Yeah, I did. I wasn't ready. Anyway.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was gonna say I watched it
And
too.
Sarah, and sorry, is it Taya?
Tekla.
Like
Tekla.
Thigla?
No, Thekla.
Tikla, okay. Get that
Kind
right.
of like tequila without the I.
Sounds good. Yeah, I'm also the same. Editing just seems to go on ad nauseum, and also, like Sarah, I'm writing a bit of everything. I have jumped into some nonfiction recently. I'm a published poet, and I just got accepted into the scriptwriting program at the Atlantic Film Festival. Just found out the other day that I'm one of the. They take 4 scripts. I don't know if there's actually 4 participants. There might have 2 people working on 1 script. So anyway, one of the 4 that was, or outlines that was accepted. So yeah, I do a mishmash of everything, and obviously with family and 3 children under 10, you gotta find the time. So time and editing and trying to get it all figured out. So nice to be here today.
And he and I are old buddies, also. If that's okay for me to say. Thank you.
And I'm Janet. I live in Pictou, and I've lived there for 2 years, but I'm from the West Coast, so probably nobody knows me.
I do.
Yeah, we met.
And you pitched the publisher.
Yes, I was there.
A fabulous
Were you
story.
the one sitting on your bumper in the car?
No.
No,
Oh, sorry.
no. I'm trying to think, I was 2 before you, I think. I was near the end.
Ah.
So I was pitching about, I
The short
write
stories.
about family life.
The short stories.
No, Circle Island. Right?
Apologize. I was pacing the
Stick
whole
around,
time.
and I'm gonna do a reading later, and then we'll
Yeah. Come to open mic, more refreshing.
So yeah, I write short stories and fiction about family life, and I wasn't on that email list, so I'm looking forward to seeing what the assignment is.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, if you like, you can send it to me later. If you want to do the exercise, I'd be delighted to.
Sorry, Janet.
Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, so I thought I would thank you all very much. I'm looking forward to this. I thought I would start by talking about my 3 books. The first one is called Salvage. In summer of 2007, I think, I was living in Ottawa, and I had 2 weeks vacation coming up, and I had a sailboat and no girlfriend. And I thought, well, I've always wanted to write a novel. I'm going to get in my sailboat and go off to Anchor and spend 2 weeks at Anchor and see if I can start a book. So I went down the Ottawa River on my old Tanzer 26. I had a gasoline generator and a laptop. And so the poor people at the anchorage at Voyageur Provincial Park would have to listen to my generator for a couple hours a day while I got charged up my laptop. By the time I finished my vacation, I had a manuscript, and that was my beginning of fiction writing. I thought I'd read the opening passage for you. The book has ended up being called Salvage. Philip Scarnham first set eyes on the foundering lobster boat when he steered the schooner Cerebus round the first buoy of the Sambro Passage and looked across the roiling grey sea for the next marker. The schooner's sails were taut as drumskins, and the lines squeaked as they yanked against the wooden blocks. Scarnham had not shortened sail when he should have, so the boat was overpowered, surging up the 8-foot swells and splashing down into the troughs. throwing water onto the deck where it beaded on the wood that he had spent so much time sanding and varnishing that winter. He only glimpsed it for a moment, a small rectangle of white amid the spray-plumed rocks off Cape Sambro. But it looked like there was a boat where no boat should be. Hello. Oh, don't be sorry at all.
I'm going to estimate how long it takes to get to And then I got lost, so.
No problem. Welcome.
Well, you'll see Steve
This
back.
is what
Yeah.
you're doing.
Oh,
That's our friend Dawn.
hi. Hello.
She did the assignment.
Hi, Steve.
Hi, welcome. So, this is a book about a guy who lives on a boat in Chester, and he's delivering a schooner and salvages a lobster boat, which is mentioned in that passage, and discovers there's cocaine on it, and so it's a sort of there's eventually villains and guns and strong language and cocaine and all kinds of things. So.
True story?
No. Although there are similar stories down on that shore of people smuggling cocaine and various other drugs.
Here in Pictou County, this is a hotspot.
Really, yeah. So when I started to write this, I didn't have an outline. I had this vague idea of this guy. I could see him in my head. I thought of it years ago when I visited the back harbor at Chester, and I thought, oh, I should write an adventure story about a guy who lives right there. This is such a cool atmospheric area. So I had this idea, and I had 2 weeks, and I had a sailboat, and I had a laptop, and I just started spieling it out. When I get stuck, I would go and jump into the water and hang off the anchor line and stare up at the ceiling until I thought of the next scene. So this is one way of working. And it's, they call it going by the seat of your pants. So you write scene by scene without an outline, which, because I didn't know any better, is how I proceeded. I later learned about a technique that I have adopted, which is to write an outline. I was heavily influenced, I've been helped by a book called Story by Robert McKee, M-C-K-E-E. And I'm going to read a few passages from it later. But it's a book really for screenwriters, but the technique is the same. And what he describes as a good way to proceed is a system using file cards. So that you write every scene on a file card, and then you organize them, and you can use them. You can remove one file card and move it to a different place and organize your whole project like that. What I eventually settled on with my later books is a process where I go by the seat of my pants for a period, usually one writing time of a week or whatever, so that I get characters, an atmosphere, and a place, and then let it sit for a little while and do the outline. And then once you do the outline, then you basically go through and write the scenes. McKee references in his book a line from Alfred Hitchcock, the film director, who describes how he would create the screenplays for his films. And he said, when the screenplay has been written and the dialogue has been added, we're ready to shoot. McKee references this because it shows how Hitchcock worked. He sees dialogue as something that is added after the project is completed, which I think is actually kind of a useful way to think. So you're creating the skeleton of a story, and then you go in and you just kind of type up everything. That is the technique that I came to use. I did not know about that at the time of Salvage when I was going by the seat of my pants. I've since been to, Salvage actually was nominated for a Thriller Award. So I went to the International Thriller Writers Festival down in New York City and attended a bunch of sessions and talked to other to real professional thriller writers, and there's sort of two camps. There's the outliners and there's the pantsers, which are the people who go by the seat of their pants. So I use this technique of first outline or being a pantser and then outlining. There are other people who obviously know what they're doing because they're successful in selling books, who never write an outline. So there's different ways of proceeding. The other thing I thought I would mention about salvage is I had not thought at all about narrative techniques. And I decided early on that that I would proceed by just being very simple, by thinking of it cinematically, in that there is a camera in the that's how I thought of it. The narrator or the reader is observing this character, Philip Scarman. We don't know what he's thinking, and we never observe any scene that he is not in. So that's just, I thought of a simple way, because I didn't really want to wrestle with understanding different narrative techniques, and I thought that a simple approach like that would work for this. I've since learned a fair bit, I think, about different kinds of narrative techniques. My third novel, my most recent novel, Social Misconduct, I use first person, and the novel that I've half finished now is also first person. I think that can provide opportunities for interesting postmodern sort of approaches to things, the unreliable narrator and that kind of thing. I like that. But I thought I would talk a little bit about a style of narration that I learned about from James Wood, who's a Harvard professor and a New Yorker fiction critic, a very interesting man. I took a class from him, and learned about this technique, which is indirect. It's either what do you call it? Close third person. Sorry. Or was it indirect, free? I'll think of it. And it was sort of invented by Flaubert, who wrote Madame Bovary. And the idea is that that you follow one character and observe them, as I did in Salvage, but every now and then you enter their thoughts. And you do so, typically, there's a sort of technique where you describe them doing something, and then without saying, so-and-so thought this, you start describing their thoughts, seamlessly moving from narration to the character's inner voice. I likely should have known about this before I wrote Salvage. The book would likely be stronger if I'd taken this approach. So Woods, in his book On Fiction, which I think is excellent, gives an example of it. So here's a traditional narrative technique. He looked over at his wife. Quotes, "She looked so unhappy," he thought, "almost sick." He wondered what to say. So that's a traditional form, using quotations and using indirect freestyle. I think that's what it's called. I'll think of it. Here's the alternative to that passage. He looked at his wife. Yes, she was tiresomely unhappy again, almost sick. What the hell should he say? So you see the way that it immediately grounds you in his view of the world without the cumbersome business of saying he thought or he wondered. So I think that that's a very interesting technique, and it's one that if you're going to write a novel, it's what wise to consider that. Oh, that's, and you'll see it in popular fiction, you see it in, and you can almost go through a finished section that you've worked on and say, okay, are there opportunities for me to make this more effective by using that approach? Okay. So after I wrote Salvage, I assumed, because it was so splendid, that the publishers would be lining up to beat down my door, and I eventually was surprised to find that they weren't, which is a kind of important lesson, is there's always a lot more manuscripts than there are spots for manuscripts. So, kind of frustrated by my inability to place Salvage, I decided, well, the sensible thing for me to do is write a 350-page book and see if I can get that one published. And that is Deadline, which I thought I'd give you a sense of that. It's a political thriller set in Ottawa. The hero is a hard-drinking Nova Scotia political journalist who I like to joke is like better looking than I am, but not as smart. So sort of like an alter ego. Chapter 1, We'll Walk Down. There must have been something funny in the birthday cake, Captain Isabelle Galarneau used to joke, because ever since she turned 30, her hips had been expanding. On August 14th, her 31st birthday, when it seemed like everything she owned was suddenly tight around the bottom, and she could imagine herself getting plumper and plumper for the rest of her life, alone and increasingly desperate, she had decided to do something about it. Every weekday morning for the past 4 months, she had gone jogging, listening to 80s pop on her iPod as she ran. So this is a political thriller, and again, set in Ottawa. And it's one of these things, there's 2 books that I've written. I earlier wrote A Restaurant Guide to Nova Scotia, where I realized long after writing them that the world may not actually need that book. So that there is not a huge demand for Ottawa political thrillers. But I was frustrated that I wasn't able to interest publishers in it. So I decided to publish it myself. I knew that I had a market, that I was living in Ottawa at the time, and that I would be able to sell some copies, and I could sort of feel the moment for the book passing. So I said, that's it, I'm going to do it. And I'm glad that I did, and I did sell some copies. I sold thousands of books and made a little bit of money, and I still get the odd little check. I got one recently from a bookstore where I'd placed some books. Around the same time, I got a message from a writer, Susanna Kearsley, who had read Salvage. I submitted it to one of the Canadian Crime Writer Awards for an unhanged Arthur, it's called, which it did not win. But this, about 2 years after that, she emailed me and said, that story stuck with me. You should try to get that published. And so I kind of thought, well, good. And I worked again and got an agent, and I managed to get it published. So I wrote it before Deadline, but it came out after Deadline. And then for this book, I used the technique that I had learned from Robert McKee's book Story, which is outlining it. It's quite a complicated story with a lot of different characters, like a lot of political thrillers are. So I really needed to outline it, and that was an interesting process. Again, I went away on my boat and sat down. And I remember thinking, what a curious job it is that I've chosen here for myself during this period in which I was outlining, because it's so complicated. It took a long time just to outline. And it's the strangest kind of work. You sit around and think, well, what would happen next? Oh, yeah, okay. And you write that down, and you think, okay, if that happens and this had happened, then what would happen next? And just day after day of trying to imagine the plot and create the skeleton. And then the writing process that follows that, outlining, is just a matter of staying in your seat, right? So you sit there hour after hour, filling in the seat, as Hitchcock says, adding the dialogue, basically. So the skeleton of the story is there. One of the things that I thought I'd mention that also from that I learned from McKee's book is 3-act structures. I think it's very useful in outlining to ponder a book like that. It's not necessary. There are many people who never study this stuff and just do it instinctively. That's not the way my brain works. It seems to me useful to be able to sit down and say to yourself, what is the inciting incident, for example? Every story has an inciting incident. If an event that takes the protagonist and changes their life, it presents a challenge. I often think about this story as an example to use with this is Little Red Riding Hood. Little Red Riding Hood, if the story is about Little Red Riding Hood and there's no wolf, right? It's a story about a little girl who goes to visit her grandmother, has a lovely visit and goes home, right? That is not an interesting story. It's a better day for Little Red Riding Hood, but there's no reason for us to think about that. So the inciting incident there is the moment when she comes to realize that that's not grandma, that's a wolf. I want to tell you what McKee says about inciting incidents. The inciting incident radically upsets the balance of forces in the protagonist's life. The protagonist must react to the inciting incident. The energy of a protagonist's desire forms the critical element of design known as the spine of the story. Spine is the deep desire in an effort by the protagonist to restore the balance of life. It's the primary unifying force that holds all other story elements together. It should happen very near the beginning of the story. It's something that happens typically to the protagonist that the protagonist reacts to. Very often then the protagonist is overwhelmed again by the response of the universe to their actions, their unsuccessful first actions to put the universe right. And so there's a concept that McKee describes as the gap between reality and expectations. The story lives in the gap. Little Red Riding Hood expects to have a nice little visit with her grandmother. The gap that opens up is that her grandmother is a wolf now, or a wolf has eaten her grandmother. And so the rest of the story lives in that gap, and at the end, we're closing that gap, right? Like the resolution of a song, in a way. So I'm just going to read you a bit from my third book, and then we'll get to the exercise, I think. So my third book is Social Misconduct, which is, I felt after these other two books that I both had, in both cases I had kind of masculine protagonists who are, people would say, well, that's your alter ego, and I would have to say, well, kind of, I guess. You know, they're Nova Scotian characters, Nova Scotian men. So with Social Misconduct, I decided two things, that I wanted to use narrative techniques that were more ambitious. So I decided to, and I was also interested in gender questions. I'd realized Deadline was partly modeled by or inspired by House of Cards, the original British book and series, which some of you may be familiar with the American version of it. And I came to realize that a lot had changed in gender politics between that 70s British series and the 80s 2000s American version, and that the female characters were much more complex and more central to the story. So I saw that as a way that our stories change as our societies change. And I had my first two books, I was aware that I felt, considering that I treated this similar sort of material in Deadline to the material that the geniuses behind the American House of Cards handled, and I realized that I had not really advanced in my story the gender dynamics as significantly as they had, right? And so it got me thinking about the Bechdel test. I don't know if you're all familiar with that, which is an idea, it was invented by an American poet named Bechdel, I forget her first name. Alison Bechdel. It says, look at any work of fiction and discover whether it passes the Bechdel test. Is there a conversation between two female characters where they discuss something other than a male character? And you can kind of quickly tell whether a book passes or fails that test. So I was conscious of this and conscious of having used fairly simple narrative techniques and interested in challenging myself more. So I decided to write and I was also interested in trying to research the market, which is not nobody makes that particularly easy. It's a very competitive world, and I thought, well, I started to realize that there are books that have a moment, that respond to, that are meaningful to people in a particular moment because of what's happening in the culture, and that there's something that happens where people say, well, you've got to read this. Have you read that? So there's something about the moments that are linked to the culture. We tend to think of fiction as this thing that lives in this separate world and it's permanent, and that's not really the case. It's part of the churn of culture, of how our stories of how we come to understand ourselves. So I decided to write a book about in the first person with an unreliable female narrator who works in social media marketing in New York City. I'm going to read you the first couple paragraphs of that. I dropped my phone into the Hudson River yesterday. I was standing at the back of the ferry, traveling to Jersey City from the floating glass-walled terminal at the foot of the World Financial Center. I stood there in the wind and the sun like a carefree tourist, gaping at the tower, and put my hand over the rail and opened it and let my iPhone X fall into the churning water below. I didn't look down to see it sink below the surface in case they were watching me. I don't think they were, though, because they didn't need to watch me. Not while I had the phone. But I couldn't be sure, and I can't afford to take any chances. That's my new motto, take no chances. I keep thinking about that stupid phone sitting on the bottom of the river because I keep thinking, hey, this is boring. I should check my phone. Oh, I can't. It's on the bottom of the river. This happens less often today than it did yesterday. I hope that soon it will go away completely. So, with this story, what I was trying to do, I said she's an unreliable narrator. It's first person. It's a young woman. It's an American, and there's also two timelines. Each chapter alternates from a different timeline, and it's also all written in the form of a diary. So it was quite complicated. I had to use a spreadsheet to keep it all straight, and I had to do a great deal of research. So all of the sites in New York City and Scranton and Jersey City, I visited all these places. I would take notes and take photographs with my cell phone. I interviewed people about social media, and about the way that the language is evolving among young people in the United States in the tech world. I hung around Silicon Alley in New York. I read poetry and fiction by interesting young female American writers. I did all kinds of things to sort of make sure that this was grounded in the real world. There was an important scene involving an African American sex worker in Scranton. So when I went to Scranton to interview, to do research, and I went to a strip bar and found an African American sex worker and talked to her and told her about my story. And instead of, I think she was probably, or I paid her as if I was going to get a lap dance, but just asked her questions instead. Which again, I remember thinking, well, this is a funny way to make a living, isn't it? And then I wrote it, and this I think is a useful technique, is the beta reader. So I realized that I wanted to get feedback, in particular from the kind of reader that I was looking for, and it's an important market, which is young women in general. But for this kind of cutting edge story about the new world, I thought young women. And so a lot of my female friends, I would say, can you do me a favor? Will you read my as yet, this work in progress? And they would say yes. And so what I did is I created a PDF. This is after the book is finished, after I have a completed draft. And I made 2 PDFs of the first half, and it ended with a questionnaire. I wanted to be able to tell, to the extent that I could, whether the effect that I was trying to have was working. And I needed to do that in particular because the unreliable narrator with the confusing timelines, I was afraid that some of what I was trying to do is kind of subtle and tricky, and I didn't know whether it was working or not. So I sent these out to people. They were very kind. Some people said, yes, I'd love to, and I never did. Which, it's like asking someone to help you move. You can't be mad at them if they don't want to, right? Or if they, well, yeah, sure, I'll show up on Wednesday. Oh, I'm busy, actually. So when they sent me back the filled out questionnaire for the first thing, then I sent them the second one. Because I wanted to get their ideas about what they thought was happening halfway through the book. And then I spent a long time seriously digesting their comments. Particularly, there were useful things for me where women would say, well, I would never say that about myself. Here's you've got the female thing wrong there. And I hope that all worked. And in the end, I was able to do what I'd been scheming and hoping to do, which was to place this with one of the big 5 publishers. I sold it to Simon & Schuster, and it was published in Canada and the United States. And so that was a long time ambition of myself, which I didn't really even understand what was involved when I went down on that boat and started writing salvage. I did a lot of things in order to create something that would answer that. There are many other people who probably have better manuscripts sitting in a drawer someplace that they will never be able to place. There are other people who are such geniuses that they write something and it's immediately snapped up, but that's not really very common. It's a very difficult and competitive world to try to place a manuscript. So there, okay, I think that's probably, I wanted to give you sort of a rough idea of what I know and what I've learned from my years of writing thrillers. I've been going on for a long time. Before we proceed to the exercise, has anyone got any questions that they want to ask about what I've talked about so far? Or are you all just desperately bored?
I wanted to ask about the time frame. You mentioned that you had it in 2 different places or two different narrators, or 2 different points of view.
2 different time frames in social misconduct.
Yeah.
So there's this moment which we find her on the ferry to Jersey City, and she's thrown her cell phone in the water. Half the book carries on from there, following her as she goes on the run, actually to Scranton, and ultimately, well, I don't want to spoil it in case you want to read And so there'll be a chapter describing where she's going, what she's doing, and then the next chapter begins on the day that she starts working at the social media marketing company where she works.
So that's like a going back in time.
Yes, so it proceeds like this. And the last chapters of the book are filling in the time just before she gets on that ferry. And at the end of her voyage on the second thing. So it made it quite challenging because any time that I started to move a scene, it would interrupt the back and forth between these time passages.
It's something I've been working on, and William McIntyre in The Bishop's Man, he did it with italics,
Right.
and that annoyed me to death. So I didn't want to do that. That's
Right.
what technique is. Thanks.
Sorry, the italics were the protagonist thinking, or the protagonist,
The
Point of view.
protagonist thinking back to another time,
uh,
and it's like you get a whole page or half page of ordinary typeset, and then it's in italics, and it's kind of a little bit of an error, or the margins are wider. So it's all done that way, but I have a tendency to skip italics because it's somebody's instruction to me.
Right.
So I don't wanna read them. Well, yeah, I was just wondering how you did that. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would just use it doing narrative technique. So it's also there's two different tenses.
Right.
The all the sections that take place after she drops her phone in the river are all present tense, and present tense first person is a very 21st century style, and I think it's interesting. First person present tense. I walk across. I see the thing. The sun is bright. It has a real immediacy, and a lot of the interesting fiction by young writers now. I think one of the most, what's it called, Cat Person? It's this amazing short story last year, year before in the New Yorker. I think that's first person present tense. Anything else? Anyone else have any?
I have two questions about research. The first one is, and I'm trying to get a laugh at this, is do you pay people when you research them?
No,
Okay.
I don't have any money, so I don't. Or I don't have enough.
Except for his laugh, yes.
But yeah.
Yeah.
Apart from that, like I was wondering if you, when you interview
Everyone's
somebody,
told us.
you know, at length to learn about a point of law, for example, would you pay, you know, retired judge or whatever?
I recently paid for a novel that I've got half finished, which is partly set in a Mexican prison. I paid a lawyer in Mexico to get me into a prison.
Okay.
And you got you out again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's more to that story.
I don't think getting in would be easy.
Yeah,
In keeping with research, when you draw the line, say, okay, I know enough about that topic now, that I move on to learn something else. Like, would you consider yourself an expert in social media or just a knowledgeable person?
it's amazing what you can learn online if you just, you know, are persistent and instead of wasting time going on Facebook, you start Googling stuff and waste time doing that. And all, how do you know? At some point it's like, okay, I gotta write. So
Because I watched a video, it was Andrew Piper, and he said some people will learn so much, put so much research in something, they could have a PhD in it, but then they never get the story done.
right.
They've wasted all this time. You should learn enough to be knowledgeable, but move on.
I think that's probably right. Yeah. He blurred my last book, if I'm not mistaken.
Really?
Yeah.
Very nice.
I'd like to know what method you prefer. To go away for the 2 weeks and write, or to outline and research and...
So, I like to go and spend 2 weeks and do nothing but write fiction and go for walks and be alone. For me, it's never really part of my regular life. I'm not married, I don't have children, I don't have to. There are other people who write for 45 minutes a day before the kids get up and are very, very successful, right? So there's no one way to approach it, but what I like is going on a boat or going to a cottage alone, and I find that there's something that happens to me on about day 3, where I start to get obsessive and my brain starts, it starts working, and I get to a different sort of place. And I like that, and then do that for about 2 weeks, and then drop it and leave it and don't look at it for a while. And I find it hard to get to that place where I think I was a kind of creative high if I'm also interacting with people. Right? Like I don't actually want to be talking to other people or,
Yeah.
So for me, isolation is good. Anything else, or should we get to the exercise? So I guess maybe we'll go around the same way that we did the introductions, if you don't mind. I'll just mention the exercise. You didn't get the emails, so sorry about that. But I'll explain. So the exercise is, and this is from Anne Bernays, from her class, that I've stolen it, I've borrowed it. So the idea is that there are 26 sentences. First sentence begins with A, second one with B. What I found to be useful in Anne's class is to get, we have sort of the listeners comment on it afterwards. I want to make 2 points about that. One is, I think it's a good idea. I at times found it very painful to listen to critical comments about things that I read in class. And the point of this is to learn what's working and what's not working, and it's good, useful process. Try not to let it bother you. If people say negative things, it can be somewhat of an attack on your ego, because you're sitting there all the time writing by yourself thinking, oh, what a genius I am. So that's one point. The second point I would say is one thing that I think for commenters and listeners to think about, and for one of the most useful things I found about this exercise when I was doing it, is that question of whether what you're trying to do is succeeding. Often on the most practical level, sometimes you will think, well, this character is a 6'5" bearded biker, but you haven't explained that. And so the reader will be, or the listener in this case, will be like, I got confused because so that's a good thing for us to think about in the commenting and so on.
So I'm very happy to be here, and I'm very interested to meet you all. And this was a great assignment just to kind of get the juices flowing. So so I sat and wrote this. It's kind of a little bit dreary, but it's okay. It's called Into the Gray. Okay. A dog's love is like no other, in my opinion. Bob was no ordinary dog, and it should be noted that he never left his side. Cancer, they say, whoever the hell they are, has a smell, and I guess you could say that Bob was well aware of it long before the rest of us were let in on this inconvenient, poorly timed, infuriating truth. Frank not only had cancer in both his lungs, which was uber not surprising since he smoked from the age of 9 and was now 65, but it had already metastasized to his spine before also making a stop at his liver, lymph nodes, and last but not least, in the gray matter that most people would remember him for most. Damn it all to hell, how did we get here? Endings were something I always dreaded, but yet, why do I now feel lighter? Finally, he is at peace, and his suffering is over. Guilt consumes me for feeling relieved. How do you go from complaining about erect toilet seats and poorly chosen avocados and rogue socks strewn below where he once sat in his favorite ugly green chair, to now sitting in the deafening silence that seemed to resonate in contrast to the phlegmy rattling that had mercifully finally ceased? I marvel at how surreal it seems, despite knowing that we would arrive here at this stop. Just because you know they're dying doesn't mean it is still not a shock when it finally happens. Ken would be here soon from the airport, and he'll be devastated that he did not make it here in time to say his goodbyes, or at least to comfort his mama in her time of need. Long pauses between his breathing had me holding my own breath, not knowing if he was gone. But now he is, and it seems unfairly final. Maybe I shouldn't have sent them all away, as I know they meant well, as it enunciates that I am all alone. No one knows the way you'll handle such situations until you're in them. Only Bob and I needed to be here with him. He would have wanted it that way. Possibly he somehow orchestrated Ken's flight being delayed. Questioning God's will has never proven to be helpful in my life, but I still have not reconciled my anger with the big guy. Rest easy, my love. Rest easy and know that I will pick myself up and dust myself off after washing away all this pain and sorrow with an ocean of tears. Save a spot for me and say hi to our baby and my parents. Time will heal, they say. Those damn they don't know my pain. Under the blanket lay your frail body, broken body, and so I will lay with you one last time. Vibrancy gone from us both. While I lay here staring vacantly, while tears brimmed and rolled, I couldn't help but wonder when Bob would emerge from under the bed where my dead husband now lay, as he had been under there grieving since last night. Why is it that I too feel as though I have died, or that this is just a terrible dream? X-rays showed that your spine was crumbled, and as I lay here, I am struck by the hysterical thought that if you were the backbone of the family, and you were, we are all screwed. Yearning to wake up from the nightmare, zest has left the building, and now only numbness fills the void.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you. No, I think we should have
Oh, yeah.
a discussion.
You caught me.
I know, well, axe, like what word are you gonna use?
Right from the beginning, with the dog being able to smell disease or sickness or illness, you caught me right from the beginning, and then you come full circle back to the dog under the bed, which I found very effective. Very
Thank you.
effective.
Yeah, I like
absolutely.
that too, because I was thinking, well, what happened to Bob?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, why did she start with Bob and, yeah.
Yeah.
It's just weird, the things that you think about when you're in these situations. You just think really strange. And everything's surreal and, you know, when you have certain life experiences. And actually, when my mother died many, many years ago, our dog went under the bed for 2 days. And he wouldn't come out. He didn't come out for 2 days.
Mhm.
So anyway, I just kind of pulled that in there. And we just got a new puppy, so I was like, what am I gonna write? I was looking at the puppy and I'm like, oh, I had no idea where I was going with it, so.
Oh, you're so biased.
Anyhow, but yeah.
It comes across to me as you can tell that it's based on real feeling, and you've captured that sense of loss and.
I'm a therapist too, so
Oh, are you?
I've had
Well, let's
my
talk later.
Yeah.
You have any openings?
I do actually, no. I have 27 years of listening to people's pain and you know, my own life experiences as well. So I usually put that, that's why I tend to go dark, because I feel I like to write stuff that people can connect with. But I do write other more light and fluffy stuff.
Well, we started earlier than planned, so we missed having you talk about, everyone else sort of said what they were working on in their writing.
Well, I am working on many different things, and if I could land on something, and if I could, like, you know, I come to these types of things to focus myself, because I have 3 jobs and teenage boys, and I'm very busy, but I love writing, and I would love to just go get a cabin in the woods for like a month or 2 and just disappear. And not that I want to disappear from my life, but I love writing. It's but most of my writing is academic.
Right.
So, and I write poetry because you can get in and out quickly. But the commitment to writing things, like I have a psychological thriller that I'm writing. I've written a children's story. I have a story about family and sisters and those dynamics. I have another story about a young girl named Amy, and she, I actually just found this when I was looking through stuff. I had forgotten I even wrote it. And I have 5 chapters written on her and her life. And anyway, yeah, so I have a lot of things started, but nothing. I like the outline idea, so I might just pick the most fun one and just kind of do an outline and see where that takes me.
I think that one thing I've learned is that, I forget who said this, but there's no such thing as writer's block. You sit down and start writing, and if you're blocked, too bad, write. And write something else and work your way into it. And there's one, I can't remember who advises this technique, but it's one that I've used before, is start keeping a journal where if you're not writing, you're writing in your journal about the project.
Yes.
So you're saying, okay, I'm going to start by sitting down and writing in this journal. Today is this, I'm hoping to write that, this section of thing, here's what I'm working on, here's my hopes for the project, and then you put it away. Now I have done that a little bit. I think I have the journalist idea of not wanting to write anything that doesn't end up being usable because you paid for it. But that can be a good technique if you're feeling blocked or having a hard time. The main thing is, I believe, cut out some time, sit down, and finish a first draft.
Absolutely, absolutely. I also have a paranormal ghost story also started. So, like, I'm all over the map. But anyway, it's I do need to make time for it. So anyhow, I will.
Well, thank you very much. Anybody else have any other comments about her story?
Your writing is always fun. Now, fun is maybe the wrong word, but enjoyable.
That was quite an exercise. It's interesting.
It's good because it forces you to do something self-consciously, which I think gets you into the headspace of a writer. It's the same as the outlining, where you sort of recognize yourself as you're in charge of this thing. This is not just something that's happening to you. You are stepping away from it and saying, okay, well, I have a task to achieve here, and it gives you kind of painterly distance in a way. So, oh, I've got to use the blue paint now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Wonderful.
Do you wanna-
All right.
I did not title mine. Oh, hang on, I have to introduce myself again first. Okay, so I am Tekla Edman. I am a translator and editor by trade, although I work in completely different jobs now, mainly so I can write my own things. And I am more a poet than anything else, although I really enjoy writing prose as well. And I really enjoyed this exercise, it was fun. Okay. After everything that happened, I kind of checked out for a while. Being generally unavailable to my friends, emotionally, not that I had many left at that point. And yet life goes on, doesn't it? Couldn't be more glad about that, really. Daily I wake up, and I'm glad about that too. Eventually life returned to me actually living it. Forgive and forget, glad yet again that nobody's putting the question to me. Have you ever felt this way, where you really don't quite know how you feel? I have this friend, Zach. Just when I think I figured him out, turns out I couldn't have been more wrong about him. He defies definition, fits in nobody's box, and I've been so completely and utterly mistaken when it comes to him that I have more than once questioned my own judgment, my own instincts. Very humbling, I assure you. Only for him to then turn around and tell me, yes, you are absolutely spot on in this matter. I could not have expressed it better myself. You're so astute. Long story short, he is a mystery to me, and I am forever fascinated. Kind of, anyway. My ex called it something else. Laugh at me if you like. Mind you, I've felt like crying. No, really, I have. Of course I have. Wouldn't you? Please, the whole thing is ridiculous. Question is, how did it come to where we stand now? Racking my brains about it is not helping. Standing in my kitchen, my back against the wall. The clock ticks steady beats, heartier than either of us. Under the yellow fly-stained lamp, his face is shadowed as he assesses how serious I am. Very slowly, he gives me a straight answer, for the first time in all the years I've known him. We should do something about it. X marks the spot, you know. You want to know what happened after all that talk? Zach took off, leaving me to wonder if he was sincere after all, but returned soon enough with tips for both of us to help us with the more detailed planning. That was fun.
Thank you. Does anyone have a comment to make?
I want to know what happens next.
So do I. I don't know, I read it to my child and then said, you know, what do you think? And she was like, I don't know, caught up in preteen, other distractions. And I thought, I don't know, it sounds like some kind of revenge plotting going on. But
I know you and it is. I know that first part, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. The last few sentences almost arrived ready when I figured out I'd have the day free today, and I thought, okay, I know X, Y, and Z. Now I have to fill in the beginning.
It's a great exercise because when I just heard about it, the limitations, but I've not felt that while you've been doing the readings. I just got lost in the story. So I love that you've written it, and I didn't even know that that was purposeful, you know, to use all the letters. So exactly.
When you read it, you split the book around.
Yes, I like writing on the right side of my page, and if I know I'm almost done, and I turn it around so I can keep writing on the right side. So, yeah, I don't know, I find it uncomfortable to write on the left side for some reason.
Your flow, I feel like the way that the words and sentences go together, you have a strong facility for prose. I guess that should not be surprising since you're That's the story of how we found a skeleton in the. So I like your facility with the language, particularly because I think this is your second language.
Yeah.
That is striking to me. For a story this short, I think that it can be a good idea if there's some, if we know what the stakes are. So in this case, we have this sort of study of Zach, and this, we can see him standing there on YouTube, but we don't really know what's at issue, unless I'm mistaken. You know what I mean? So for a short story, I think it might be a good idea if you know, oh, here's, you know, is it a divorce? Is it a murder? Is there, what's going on? You know what I mean? Like, so
Yeah.
the technique and the atmosphere feels very strong.
I considered that, and then I thought, to the story that I want to tell, it does not matter. The story is about something happened, and the narrator is so desperate to ask somebody to help that basically they ask the most unreliable person they know.
Right.
And for some reason, that desperation makes this unreliable person actually somebody to be counted on. To me, that was the story, not what happened before or why,
Right.
or even what happens next.
It's about the relationship
Yeah.
between the narrator and Zach.
Yeah.
If you continue it, which we all want you to continue it, I think, will you go in the same format and start back at A?
I wouldn't continue it.
No.
It's like,
Okay, it's done.
yeah,
Okay.
it's just a
I get
moment.
it, yeah.
It would spoil the mystery if I have to explain it.
I get it, I've been there.
All right.
Well, thank you very much.
I feel like I missed a line in mine, like the 100-word sentence. Did I
You
talk
did.
about the gray matter?
Yeah,
Yeah, you
yeah,
did.
I got it,
remember
yeah.
saying that. I'm like,
Yeah,
did I even say that line? Like,
I noticed it.
Did you? Okay.
I'm like, this is,
Because otherwise the name doesn't make sense.
So I'm Sarah Bullen, just to reintroduce, I do a little reader freelance writing, journalism. I do a lot of book reviews for local magazines and whatnot. When I got, and I do write everything and I love a challenge, but when I got this in the email, I panicked and went full blown. I have 2 days to write this and my schedule doesn't permit. And I wrote Dawn, and Dawn's like, I've already started it, I love it. I'm like, oh my gosh. So I'm like, okay. So I had a surprising 15 minutes and said, I'm gonna do something and see what comes out. And I don't know. I'm not impressed by a lot of what I write. It's not brilliance to me when I'm writing, but this did it. This worked. So it's not titled, because I didn't look back at it and title it, but an army of ants crawled through the forest, one by one, until they reached the edge of the tree. Bravely, they ventured higher and higher, until the manufactured floor let them change direction. Crossing the planks through the doorway and to the edge of the sleeping bag, they crept with no destination in mind. Determined, single-minded focus and precision, so unmastered by humans, these ants traveled together as if they knew exactly what they were doing and where they needed to be. Ethan was awake first and rubbed his eyes, not ready to let the light in. Forgetting that he slept over in his friend's treehouse in the blurry first moments of waking from a sleep too short for anyone's comfort, especially his parents, Ethan wiggled and whined quietly in hopes of returning to sleep. Gross, he yelled out loudly, now too quickly awake as he noticed the crowd of ants invading his sleeping bag and altogether personal space as they ventured up his arms, in the sleeping bag, and around his neck, as he debated whether to scream, put his hands over his mouth, ears, or nose, knowing he could protect 3 orifices, if done right, but not all 4 unless he laid on his side, which wasn't easy to do while in such a small area with 3 other boys who, despite his wiggling, whining aloud, and stress, were still very much asleep. Harry was on one side of Ethan, Charlie the other. Ignoring the desire to return to sleep or the manners of letting his friends stay dreaming, Ethan, with one hand still over his mouth and nose, managed to back out of his sleeping bag and, with the help of the wall, force himself to standing. Jumping up and down, Ethan managed to rid his body of most of the ants, and he felt safe to move his hand. Keeping his screams in as much as possible, the 12-year-old watched as the ants circled the tree house and leave through the window, climbing upwards. Little by little, his friends woke up and were all surprised to see Ethan sitting against the wall with his knees to his chest and his jaw resting on his knees. Many questions were asked at once. It seemed the other boys woke a lot faster than Ethan. Nobody would believe him at first, with not an ant left as evidence, but he had to convince them. Over and over, Ethan went over his story until it almost seemed unbelievable to even him. Pondering now if it was a dream or reality, Ethan stood and climbed down the ladder, looking up the entire time in search of ants. Quickly after reaching the ground, he ran to the main house and said good morning to Ken's parents, asking if he was allowed to use their shower. Ridiculous, his dad said. Of course you can, and don't need to ask. But breakfast is ready. Staying quiet, his mother seemed shocked by my request, as we never had showers after a sleepover. This time was different, as somehow I could still feel each ant crawling on my skin, and I speed walked to their bathroom. I realized I switched perspective, point of view. Under the hot water, my skin stopped crawling, and I felt a lot better. Vigorously, I scrubbed my body with whatever soap I could find and then did it again. With the water temperature dropping, I quickly washed my hair, rinsed and got out. Xavier yelled at me to hurry as he knocked on the door, and, after shaking my clothes over the tub, I got dressed and opened the door. You showered? What is wrong with you today? Zilch, I'm good, Ethan said as he tried to remain stoic, but then screamed when he saw an ant crawl over his toe. Much lighter than yours. I wanted to change things up.
Very visual, like I could picture it.
Yeah.
It's that was well done.
Is that based on fact?
No. Thank goodness.
I like the setting and I think it's a good subject for an exercise like this, and that it's something concrete and lively and
Thank you.
I think you saved your 100-word sentence to the point where he's kind of realizing the ants, and you're building up the tension with the comment.
Okay.
You're continuing forward with that big long sentence.
Yeah,
You could feel the tension building
Yeah.
there.
that was a struggle.
But I think you pointed out as you went that you changed
Perspective, yeah, point of
perspective,
view, yeah.
we go from third person to first person.
Yeah.
Midway
Yeah.
through. But that's cool. Anybody else have
How come you didn't have them just jump out and start freaking out about the ants?
He was a considerate young boy.
Not like any young boy I know.
Your boys are considerate, come on.
Model Tonya's son, I thought.
So, no, I don't know.
Because I was just thinking if that was me, yeah.
Yeah, I
There
don't
was something about ants on CBC the last 3 days.
Really?
Did you listen to that?
No,
No.
no.
People are keeping them as pets. They can live as long as 30 years.
What?
An ant.
They need the queen, yeah.
Yeah, no thanks.
So, I'm not surprised. More of where you get inspired from thinking of what you don't want to do.
Nope, nope, I don't know. Outside, we live in the country, there's ants.
Well, thank you very much.
Good old trash. You got this. Keep it on the light.
I'll try.
My name is Ray Burns, and my story's called Me and Big G, and I kind of really took this exercise to heart and wrote just 26 sentences. I had it longer, and then I thought, I'm going to try to cut it down, so it's only like 800 words or something like that. Afternoons were always the worst. By the time we finished lunch, neither of us had any energy to do anything, let alone continue with pickups. Deciding who drove and who did the collecting usually took at least a half hour, so we were running late every day. Despite our focus on quality and Big G's long list of people we needed to visit, sometimes things fell through the cracks. Even with our checklist and pretty intense supervision from head office, mistakes were made, I admit it. For what it's worth, we didn't mean to overlook anybody because they had a schedule to keep as well, even if they didn't know it. Grim, or Big G as I like to call him, got way more heat from the bosses than I did. He was supposed to be in charge of things. I was hired to drive our canary yellow 1972 Corvette Stingray, and he did the pickups. But he always wanted to drive too, despite being as blind as a bat and nearly crashing us almost every time. Just about the time I thought things could get worse, they did. Ketchum, Idaho, not far from where Hemingway killed himself, is where we got the news. Lo and behold, we were told we were getting another member of our team, and a new brown van too. And I thought that this was just the worst thing possible, because I don't look too good in brown. And a big ugly van with the distinctive 3-letter name of a courier company on the side was definitely going to take away from our style. And I don't mind telling you that it really bothered me, because I'm a snappy dresser, especially in comparison to Big G and those robe type things he's always wearing, which are kind of his uniform, I guess. Minutes after getting the news, we were rolling down an Idaho dirt road in a van, because things can move fast in this business sometimes. Now I should introduce myself, so you can call me Doug, and the new guy is Digger. Once we got to our first pickup, Digger ran into the house and then out with the package, that's what we call them in this business, before I even stopped the van. Perhaps we were just resistant to the change, but we didn't like Digger's eagerness and energy at all because it was cramping our style and making us look bad. Quickly, we decided he had to go. Right away, I figured Big G had to do it. So that was settled. We needed a plan and something to tell HQ when they wondered what had happened. The best way we figured was to get him on Big G's list. Unfortunately for Digger, Jim and scheduling will help us if we promise to let him drive the vet sometime if we get it back after putting our plan into action. Very soon we got a message to do a pickup at his house just before dawn. When Big G was at the door, Digger started to protest, like some people do, but once he saw the paperwork, he knew there was no point in trying to bargain his way out of it. Xerox copies of the collection order, death certificate, and a report were filed with HQ, and that was it. Yesterday was our first full day without Digger in more than a week, and it felt pretty good. Zero regrets we have because we really missed this car, and I hated those brown uniforms.
That's my kind of story. I like crime stories.
Well, I had the foreshadowing of the death of Hemingway. I'm thinking, oh, they're delivering drugs and someone's going to die. They told me when I was on the edge with that feeling that was going to happen. And just as an aside, I had a friend who worked in BC who used to mule drugs over the border, and he was a big, tall, blonde, handsome guy. And the people who were running the drugs gave him this brand new Corvette or a shiny sports car, so he could just roll past the border and kind of smile with the car full of the drugs. So a lot of connections there with your story. Well done.
Thank you.
The one thing, I'm not sure why they decided to kill him. I felt like that.
He was annoying.
Exactly. Yes.
That's what I got, but it goes fairly quickly past that. So that was the one thing where I was sort of like, wait, what? Huh? You know what I mean? Like, which isn't a real critique. Just I sort of stumbled there in that we go from him being annoying to we're going to kill him without. I don't know if it has enough weight, but
Before I hacked and slashed it, it was a little more weightier and explained things a lot more, but then I decided to really go for 26 sentences and I just cut the crap out of it.
yeah, I really enjoyed it. Anybody else have anything?
I don't mind the holes in that at all. I kind of always like it when you have to fill in the blanks with your own brain. Okay.
I like the voice. It's an example actually of how first person can be so effective, that you've established a sort of somebody who I don't think is like you actually. He says, I could be wrong, but the character here.
Well, I'd love to have a Corvette, but
And the snappy dresser thing?
yeah, that's not me either.
But so that's one of the things that I think is great about first person, even as something to experiment with, is that you try to like take on another person, and that's excellent. It's something that McKee talks about, is that in his experience, a lot of writers are also actors, because actors have that experience of taking on another persona, so including William Shakespeare, greatest English writer, was an actor. So you felt like there was a different character sitting in front of us, so congratulations. Well done.
Thank you.
Now our fearless organizer.
That's why everything's so disorganized.
Don't tell them.
I'm Monica Graham, and this is called You Can't Go Back. And because I wasn't paying attention to my homework, I don't have a 100-word sentence, so I did some scribbling, and it might be 50, I don't know. Anyway, here we go. After years of thinking about home but not seeing it, the house looked small, tired, and broken. Black tar paper flapped where wooden shingles had blown off the almost flat roof, and shrubs and weeds surrounded the foundation. Cracks marred the old window glass. The branch of an apple tree leaned dangerously over the door, and I could see only flecks of the once gleaming white paint on the clapboard siding. Chimney bricks cluttered what was once the driveway, yet smoke rose in a straight line from a steel stovepipe sticking out of the kitchen wall. Definitely the place was occupied. Ever the optimist, I knocked, careful to avoid getting splinters in my knuckles. "Frig right off!" came a high-pitched wheeze that ended in a hacking cough. Grating sounds like that of a chair scraping the floor were followed by a lumbering tread towards me. "Hold on," mumble, mumble, friggin' door, mumble, mumble. I waited as the occupant fiddled with something on the other side of the door, and it finally creaked inwards. Just enough to let out a small animal, I thought, as a ginger cat streaked past my legs. "Kitty, get back here!" "Let me get Kitty for you," I offered. "Make it quick," wheezed the woman. No, it was a man. Or was it? Putting off speculations until I could retrieve the cat, I headed towards the rhubarb patch where I'd last seen the animal. Quackgrass just about choked the rhubarb and might have hidden the cat, but not from me, the cat whisperer. Recalling my technique, I distracted Kitty with my left hand while reaching my right hand behind it to grasp the loose skin of its neck in order to get a two-handed hold on the cat. "Shh, it's okay," I muttered as I carried the cat to the house. This cat had black tips on its orange ears, so it just had to be a descendant of my old cat Marmalade. Unaware that the door had now opened wide, a shiver of surprise ran down my back as I took in a dark and smelly interior, and the house's strange occupant, a human, or perhaps a hobbit, of indeterminate age and gender, clad in what possibly might be a shower curtain. "Valentina, is that you?" I gasped. "Who else?" wheezed my eldest sister, glaring at me through smeared glasses. "Xaviera, you should have come home long before now. You know they wouldn't let me out, but now that I've done my time, I can help you clean up and do repairs." Zeal for improvement was never Valentina's strong point, I realized, as she shook her head and slammed the door in my face.
That was awesome.
Very visual, when I was there.
You were there.
I was in that rhubarb patch.
It looks like I have picked a county.
Yeah.
Pretty much, yeah. It didn't take much imagination.
You have a sister like that?
I don't have any sisters.
That puts us there.
I like hiding in rhubarb patches ideas.
Yeah.
It's a good place to hide things. If I ever go missing.
Openings are so important, and the juxtaposition of the old crumbling house, and then all of a sudden there's a plume of smoke. You change over and go, oh, there's somebody in there.
Mm.
Yeah, so I like that contrast.
Okay.
I think it, yeah, you said, I think of there's a bunch of things in there where you're putting in images and visual things so that we have a sense of atmosphere and place, and it also feels very Monica Graham. Feels like
I just got out, eh?
but it feels like you're showing us your world. Do you know what I mean? Which is is great, and you're a trained observer, so you're putting in those things, and that's something that I think is those images and stuff. It's like really good. Yeah. Oh, no, maybe you haven't written one of it. You're just here to provide security. That's the security situation so far.
Scene 36 so far. A long word sitting next to this guy.
Hi, Scott Christensen. I forgot to mention earlier, I'm from Caribou Island, or I live there now. I'm originally from Truro. And when this exercise came up, I think the email came out, I don't know, 3 or 4 days ago. Anyway, they were talking about the West Coast and the problems they were having with the rising temperatures. And having lived in the Middle East, typically when someone says, oh my gosh, it's 32 degrees today with humidity, I just have to bite my tongue and say, well, where I used to live, the temperatures were much higher and so on and so forth. So I think obviously that comes into the picture here. And I did want to make a couple of changes, which I didn't, so hopefully I won't stumble over where I should have made those changes. And while I was sitting over here, I decided to call it Greyhound, although it was untitled until a few minutes ago. So, Greyhound. Another hour would not make a difference to Roxanne as she sat in the bus depot with temperatures continuing to rise in the mainland, causing a flood of travelers to scramble in the humidity into the Greyhound terminal and train station to escape the sticky air that settled into the city just before she thumbed the knife to check its sharpness after she could not open the Twinkie the bank clerk threw at her, and she miraculously caught. As her twin brothers, Spice and Spineless, sleeping like cicadas in the bank manager's car, woke to her gentle yet anxious rap on the back windshield of the pink BMW. But Roxanne was not at the terminal to take a bus. Customers ordering at the subway, she thought, would be late for their trip to Anchorage. Demands for the northbound passengers to board created a stir amongst a young couple that Roxanne watched awaiting their footlongs. Each minute after the bank had been just as precious. From the parking lot with her drowsy siblings to the taxi stand, the Twinkie survived. "Give me that," Spice had demanded in the cab. "How about your teeth?" "I just saved your life, and you going on about my teeth?" Just before her siblings continued, the Twinkie rose from the front seat of the taxi, as though a conductor quelling her backseat duo. "Keep your thoughts to yourself." "Left? Maybe left is best," Roxanne answered the cabbie, a man sporting an eye patch. "The train station is probably too busy." "No doubt. Overcrowded." "Perhaps the bus station." "Quite busy too." Right then? Greyhound." The bus station bustled, as they suspected, as Roxanne watched the young couple gather their sandwiches and run toward the beckoning bus heading up the coast for Alaska. Under the knife and her unopened Twinkie, her stomach grumbled. "Varney shouldn't have chucked that Twinkie." "Why?" Spice asked. "Xmas deserves better." "You're going to give it to me?"
Zilch nada no wayo. You dropped yours. And unless some cream-filled loving janitor fills his pie hole, it's gonna sit there teasing cats and rats and elephants and sure as you're born, Varney'll talk, but we'll be disappeared like a unicorn.
So I think that was more than 26 sentences.
Yes, I think it was, you're right.
But that's okay. It's a rough guideline. I found that a lot of fun.
It was kind of rollicking, yeah, and a bit scrambled around there. There should have been some edits made, but
I thought that was a lot of fun.
and along the thriller lines, I was trying to, yeah. Anyway, I won't say anything more. You guys can, whatever you felt about it. Banks and bus stations.
Twinkies?
Yeah,
Yeah, it was like the Twinkie was another character.
yeah, for sure.
That's all I got out of it.
Mm. I love the visual of conducting the duo in the backseat with the Twinkie.
More comments?
It was delightful. It was fun.
Fun.
Fun, yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Left it on
This
the
one,
light.
I think there was, maybe for a story this short, there was more characters. It was a little hard to absorb.
Mm.
All the characters.
Who are all these people that
Yeah.
can
But were they people?
fix it? Well, fixing your mind.
Yeah.
But I love the sort of, to me it has a kind of 70s freewheeling, crazy sort of feeling, you know what I mean? Like lots of atmosphere and lots going on. And I enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for being here. So I think that's it. So I thought I would read what I thought was the best one from the class that I did, which was not mine. I can't even remember mine, but I remember being disappointed in it. So I'll read this. I emailed him this week because I realized I didn't have a copy of it. He said, sure, yeah. One thing I would mention is one small thing that many of your stories had that I didn't feel like pointing out individually as we went, is there are some, not all of them, but I think most of them, there are some sentences that were passive that could be improved by being active. And I think that that's a good thing in the editing process, to go through, after you let it sit for a couple days and before you show it to anyone, is to go through and say, okay, sentence by sentence with a red pencil, could this be turned around so that it's using an active verb instead of a passive verb? So that's just one sort of note. Okay, so this is Chris Wyant, who's a cartoonist with the New Yorker. And quite a creative guy, not a writer, but except I guess cartoonists are writers. They write those little captions. I'll read you his. Anywhere but here, thought Turk as he stood anxiously with his back to the seawall, listening for footsteps on the gravel. Behind him, the ocean pushed against the cement barrier, spraying foam into the night air. Carnies on the boardwalk could be heard far in the distance, taunting the crowds to try their games of chance. Deliveries for the Zanucci brothers once was easy side money, but not anymore. Everything had changed. For what they did to Franny and how they gave her up to the street, he knew for the first time what he needed to do. Gulls squawked as they took flight, scared by something in the distance. Here we go, said Turk quietly as he wiped the sweat from his palms and the back pockets of his jeans. Instinctively, he glanced at the rusted piece of steel rebar by his foot, making sure it was still there. Just one more time, one last delivery, and this will all be over. Knowing that the Zanuccis would never see their money, that they would tear themselves up trying to find him in Philly or Camden,
that they couldn't afford to lose this much. This way helped calm him. Looking into the darkness, he saw the faint glow of a cigarette. Motionless, Turk watched as 3 figures slowly walked toward him, the tallest one carrying a small black bag. Nicaraguans, shit, he thought. Okay, drop the bag, step back, and you'll get the delivery, he said, as he had hundreds of times before, leaning on the familiarity of the phrase. Pulling a small brown package wrapped in tape from his jacket pocket, he watched them toss the bag in front of him. Quickly, more quickly than he would have imagined, it all fell apart. Reaching for the bag, he was surprised by the strange deliberateness of the next few moments, how they almost seemed choreographed, each movement defining the next, the flash of the gun in his face, how he felt the heat from the muzzle long before he felt the bullet penetrate, or as he fell backwards, how he would grab tightly onto the jacket of the taller one, pulling him down on top of him and allowing time enough to grab the rebar and crush the back of his assailant's head, or how the gun was now lying next to him, and with the Nicaraguan's blood mixing with his own, he was able to pull the trigger over and over until all was quiet. Silently, Turk lay on the cold sand and staring into the night sky. The ocean breeze swirled around him and lifted small white papers from the ripped black bag. Up into the sky, the papers flooded, and for a moment it was almost beautiful. Very softly in the distance, he could hear the calliope of the boardwalk carousel. Waves crashed against the seawall, and as each one grew stronger, he became weaker. Xanax-like numbness washed over him. You should have known it was a setup. They had you all along, he thought. Zanucci's. You can see why I think I thought that one was good. It's got a bunch of things going on, like, and it comes together. That his 100-word sentence, he's not here, so I'll say it, is grammatically a little weird. You can maybe tell there that this is a cartoonist, and that it's structurally kind of not. It could do with some editing, but one thing that I thought was very effective is the shifting from long sentences to short sentences. And it's the boardwalk in Philly and gangsters and guns, and somebody actually gets shot and dies in the story, which I think is, and you see it and you're in that person's skin as they're dying, as the waves are getting louder and he's getting weaker. So there's a bunch of ideas and atmosphere and color. To me, it's like my favorite Bruce Springsteen album, Wild Demons and East Street Shuffle. It takes me to like Philly boardwalk and small time hoods and stuff. So I really like that. And as I say, I can't even remember which one I did, but it wasn't very good, I don't think. So.
It's a good exercise.
Yeah. So is there anything else? Anyone want to make any comments or ask any questions? We're at 1:45, which is when we were supposed to end.
Is it really time to pass?
I think that's right.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Anything else? Everybody good? I'm sorry you didn't get the email.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you. I'm really glad.